Wow, Luis, ¿cuántos sentimientos encontrados, luces, cámara? ¿Cuánto tiempo ha pasado?
No recuerdo. A ver, desde Black Friday ha sido como un solo hoyo negro hasta acá. No hemos parado ni en tienda, ni al
Nada.
teléfono, ni en la página web. Hemos estado a tope
Sí.
hasta ahora. Siento un poco raro de vuelta enfrente de la cámara, pero también emocionado porque empezamos una nueva temporada de vídeos con mucha más producto, mucha más información.
Eso es.
Y bueno, hoy en teoría
Hoy era una comparativa de Linton con Super Linton. Lo que no veo son los altavoces.
no ve los altavoces porque lo podéis ver en la entrevista que le he hecho a Peter Comeau, el diseñador de Wharfedale, de los altavoces, pues, de los Linton, de los Super Linton, y va a entrar a detalle en lo que es el proceso de diseño, cómo llegó allí, las diferencias entre los dos altavoces, justo en la silla donde estás.
O sea, le has hecho una entrevista.
Le he hecho una entrevista y está ya lista
Pues
y
escucha,
traducida para el resto.
no se diga más. Vamos a ver la entrevista.
Vamos a ver la entrevista ya. Hola, soy Luis y bienvenidos a nuestro canal de Supersonido, pero hoy no me encuentro solo, tampoco es Mauri, es Peter Comeau, el diseñador de altavoces de la marca Wharfedale, que nos visita ya en Supersonido por tercera vez, ha estado previamente en Bilbao y esta es su segunda vez en Barcelona. Pues la semana que viene ya tenemos el ICE acá en la ciudad y viene con motivo a eso y también a hablarnos un poco sobre lo que son las Super Linton y el nuevo sistema de Quad. Peter, welcome. Welcome back to Supersonido. I mean, you're not a guest anymore. I think you're from the house already.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you very much.
So thank you for coming and, well, taking the time to come here in
It's
front of
my
all these
pleasure.
lights and listening to me asking questions. Well, we wanted to talk about Super Linton because we already have like a very short video about the differences between the Linton and the Super Linton. And the first question would be that when the brand decided to reissue the current version of the Linton, did you ever imagine it would have such a worldwide success?
Well, let's give you a bit of background as to, I grew up with what were considered to be big loudspeakers. Loudspeakers of this size, which were absolutely typical if you wanted a hi-fi system back then. I'm talking, it's in the 60s. And the thing that really is difficult for most loudspeaker designers is an aspect of speaker design which we call the baffle step, which is where when the sound reaches a frequency at which the half wavelength is bigger than the width of the speaker, then it starts to blend around the outside of the speaker. And that means that instead of all the sound coming towards you, a lot of it is now going into the room. And at that frequency, you literally get a 6 dB drop in output power.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you make the speaker narrower, that frequency goes up. And the problem is that when it goes up, it starts to intrude on the mid-range performance.
I see.
Now, you can overcome it in your crossover as best you can, but my feeling is that you will always hear it to a certain extent. It sounds a little unnatural when it's in the mid-range. So I wanted to make a bigger loudspeaker. I wanted to get back to what I remembered hearing in my teenage years, which was big loudspeakers. And we put together the Linton in order for me to sort of get that feeling back of what a big loudspeaker sounded like. And when we presented it to our sales staff, they all shook their heads and said, well, we're going to have trouble selling this. It's just too big.
Especially with the trends nowadays.
Yeah, especially with the trends. When we introduced it, the trends were always for thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner speakers. So when they didn't think they could sell it, I was confident that some people, at least, maybe a small number of people, would remember maybe what they'd heard in their youth, or would actually, hopefully, realize when they listened to the speaker that something sounded different about it. And in fact, it was the latter that happened. And a lot of people have sat down and their first exposure to Linton is there's something about this that I instinctively like. And it's that bigger speaker sound that they're
and which makes it sound more natural, like you said.
It makes it sound more natural.
More
it's
warm,
much
more
easier.
inviting.
The music flows more easily from the speaker. Everything works within the room much better. it's much easier to sit back and enjoy the music, I think.
So probably your marketing team or sales team was very happy after it was released. They were like, "Oh, great idea, Peter."
Well, yeah,
Well, yeah,
exactly. And I mean, if you think about it, Linton has remained unchanged in terms of its design and performance for 10 years now. So it's obviously stood the test of time,
It has
and
stood
that's
the test
great.
of time.
And
Yeah.
we have tens of thousands of users throughout the world who are thoroughly enjoying their speakers.
I mean, and every single day in Supersonido, we're selling pairs. I'm not gonna say
Yeah.
the quantity, but every single day. I mean,
Good.
it appeals not only, like you said, to maybe who you were trying to appeal initially, which is
Mm-hmm.
someone that remembers them speakers back in the day and wanted that warmth and stuff. But you probably discovered the other side of the market that you weren't expecting. Maybe the younger people are looking for that more vintage sound. I think. I mean, speaking from my point of view, and from people my age that I talk to, that's what they like about it. They have that feeling. Maybe the speaker that they hear in their grandpa's house, or their father that had that big speaker, and now it makes them feel like, oh, I remember like when my dad had it at home, that's the sound it gives me. And when it came to the redesign of the Super Linton, many users think that Super Linton is just a newer product, but Super Linton existed back in the day. You know what? It was a natural evolution of what Linton was in the beginning. Can you give us some insights on the story of how that happened?
Linton was introduced in 1965, and it had a brand new cosmetic design, designed by Robert Gutman, who was a renowned industrial designer, and he gave us this look of the chamfered internal edges, the inset grille, the overall look of the speaker, which today I think is still very attractive, and was certainly considered as extremely attractive when Linton was introduced in 1965, and it did very well because of its looks as much as its sound quality. But there was a feeling that it was a little lacking in bass performance. So in 1967, they enlarged the cabinet, Wharfedale enlarged the cabinet for the Super Linton, which gave it an improved bass response, and that did very well too. So that's really the history of how the Super came about.
Super Linton. Just a lack of bass. People were feeling that it was lacking a bit of bass, maybe, the speaker for their liking. Yeah. And because now with the new Super Linton, we also see there's a difference in size, just on height, from what I can tell. Was kind of the same difference back in the day, or
no? It was much more than that.
Much more than that, right?
Yes.
Because it wasn't they weren't that efficient now. The speakers.
It was a closed box. It wasn't a bass reflex box.
Ah, it was a closed box.
Yeah, it was a closed box. So then, when you go much larger, you do get that extra extension.
I see.
It works really well.
I wasn't aware of that. Yeah. So, and apart from like the size of the cabinet and what can you tell us? What are the main differences on the Super Linton nowadays compared to the latest iteration of Linton? Well,
the history of Super Linton is really down to some users wanting something more. And I'm always very aware of what people are saying on social media, because I like to get messages from my customers. I like to hear what they're doing with my products. My mission is to help people enjoy music in the home to the best of the hi-fi system's ability. And to do that, it really enthuses me when I hear that people are enjoying the products that I design. So I always keep an eye on what people are doing with my products and what they think about them. And I noticed that some people, the small number of people, were saying, "Can I improve my Lintons?" And when I looked closely at what they were trying to do, they were saying, well, they're a little bit warm sounding and I would like more detail at the treble end. And then once you start asking questions like that, then there are people, of course, who respond, people in the do-it-yourself market, for example, who respond and they say, oh, well, you want to change these capacitors and you want to do this and you want to do that.
And this is you looking on the computer and like, no!
And I'm thinking, well, okay, for a do-it-yourself person to take the speaker apart and take the crossover out and replace these components might seem like easy for them, But for most users, they don't want to do that.
Right.
For instance, they don't want to disturb a product which they already like, because they don't know what they're going to get when they make these changes. It's a shot in the dark. And secondly, they don't have the technical expertise to do it correctly. So my immediate response was, okay, well, I'll look into this. And I actually promised people that I would make some changes and report back. What actually happened was, when I started to make changes, I realized that it wasn't as simple as just replacing a few capacitors. You needed to do more. Now, the reason for that is because every speaker is a balance, and it's a very critical balance. So, for example, what you do to the treble unit and the crossover to the treble unit will affect how the bass sounds. The reason for that is because we don't hear bass, mid-range, and treble as three distinct areas. We hear the whole frequency spectrum at once. So if you alter what the upper harmonics of your reproduction of a certain instrument are doing, then it will affect the way that you perceive the fundamentals. So you have to get that balance right. If the relationship between the upper harmonics and the fundamental tones are not correct, then your brain is confused. It has to work harder to try and put the music together, and that means you don't sit back and relax and enjoy the music. So I found that I couldn't just make these changes in the treble
without affecting the rest.
Because it completely destroyed the natural performance of the speaker as a whole. So then I started thinking, okay, what can we do? Is it worth producing a special model which is a response to what people are looking for? And I talked to our marketing team about it, and they said, well, back in 1967, there was a Super Linton. Why don't we do a Super Linton? So, yeah, okay, let's do a Super Linton. It won't be an improved Linton. It will be a brand new product, but still in the Linton's clothes. So the first thing we did, funnily enough, was to say, okay, by that time I'd already got an idea what I was going to do in the treble. So now we have to improve the bass performance to match this. So the first thing I did was went to our engineers and said, I need this performance out of the bass unit. And by the way, while we're doing this, let's try and get more extension, because that's what the original Super Linton had. So they worked on it, and after several trials, we finally came up with a bass unit, which was a huge improvement in performance over the standard Linton.
And could you mention what are the main differences on the, like, maybe on materials or in design of the bass that made it sound different?
The cone is the same, the surround is the same, the chassis is the same, but the motor system is hugely improved.
Okay.
It's a much more powerful magnet system with the voice coil and everything else to match that. Distortion is lower, has much better transient impact and much greater control. So those are the basic differences. When we put that inside the Linton cabinet, it wasn't perfectly matched. So we did the calculations and found that if we increased the height of the cabinet by around 2 inches, around 40 or 50 millimeters, that gave us the extra internal volume because with a bass reflex loudspeaker, you don't need that as much as you do with a closed box loudspeaker. That gave us the extra volume, which gave us the bass extension and correctly matched the bass unit. So that's why the cabinet is slightly taller.
Okay.
And then...
I'm sorry, would have been considerably bigger if it was completely sealed?
Oh, yes, it would.
How much bigger would it have been?
Well, we'd have probably made it a floor-standing model.
A floor-standing model.
Stand mount.
With the same kind of... Oh, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
Right, right. But that idea didn't cross your mind at that...
No, because...
it's not very common nowadays.
It's not common nowadays to have closed box loudspeakers. People want the bass extension that you get from a bass reflex loudspeaker and the efficiency you get from a bass reflex loudspeaker. and they don't respond well to closed box loudspeakers. If you want to make something that's popular,
You gotta make it.
then bass reflex is the way to do it.
It's the way to go. And it caught my attention that you said that you didn't think of the Super Linton as an improvement of the Linton, but as a new product.
Well,
obviously it has its influence from Linton, but
Yes.
you thought about it as a new product.
Well, like I say, I was looking at what people wanted,
Right.
and I think what people wanted was a very, very something that was far more detailed in the way that it exposed what the musicians were doing. Far more explicit, more audiophile, if you like.
Yeah.
And also, the other thing that I noticed was that a lot of Linton owners were putting their speakers hard up against walls and in corners. Now, that gives, with the Linton 85, that gives what I would call a slightly overblown bass output.
Yeah.
And a few people were naturally complaining about that. So that was the other aspect that we brought into Super Linton, was to respond to that. So Super Linton you are able to put it much closer to the front wall, and you can, if you need to, you can push it closer to the corner, and it doesn't have that problem.
Okay, how just briefly, obviously I'm not an engineer, how do you solve that problem, still having the blast reflex on the back, on the dispersion?
It doesn't matter where this is a hi-fi myth. It does
thank you, okay.
not matter where the ports are.
So what matters?
So all that matters is that you have a system that works. If you look at some of the other designs I've done for Wharfedale, they have a port that comes out into the plinth with quite a narrow gap from the output of the port into the plinth. We call it the slot-loaded system. And actually that having a boundary very close to the port gives you more bass extension and more bass efficiency.
Yeah.
So you can take a speaker with a rear port and put it fairly close to the front wall, say within 50 millimeters to the front wall. And all that will happen was that you will get more extension and more power. Yeah,
exactly. But that's what people sometimes complain, at least in a home environment where a lot of bass extension.
But that will happen with any loudspeaker.
That will happen with any
loudspeaker. Whether it's front or rear ported, it still happens.
So you're saying that if I just to entertain the idea, if I had the same speaker, one with a bass reflex on the front and one in the back, and I put it in the same corner, so what
you still get the effect of the reflection of the bass from the front wall.
But would you say that with the one in the back, it would be more pronounced, maybe?
You will get more extension.
Yeah,
actually.
More extension.
It's a benefit.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Fair enough. Well, first time I hear about it like that.
Yeah. So that was the other aspect that we introduced into Super Linton. And like I say, it quickly became, as we were going through the design exercise, it quickly became apparent that this was a very different sounding loudspeaker to Linton 85. And we knew perfectly well that it wouldn't necessarily satisfy people who loved the warm, attractive, emotionally engaging sound that Linton 85 has. But it had those qualities, but it also had this audiophile exposure of exactly what musicians are doing, enabling to hear every single detail of what was going on in the soundstage. And the soundstage is also more precise, it's more focused. So whereas with Linton 85 you have a big soundstage, but it's not necessarily very, very precise. A lot of people don't want that. A lot of people very happy.
I can tell you from my experience in the store, like actually, maybe you lost some people that were interested, don't like how different it sounds from the original Linton, but there's a lot of people that actually were expecting a Linton to do exactly that.
Yeah.
And then now it's gained a lot of customers because a lot of customers that, I like the warmth that it still remains from the original Linton, but now I got that extra detail which I was looking for. So I think it reached a really good balance, the Super Linton. I mean, we've been really enjoying him here.
That's exactly what we were hoping for.
Oh, nice
Yes,
one.
yes.
And jumping now to the mid-range, what are the
Yeah.
difference on the mid-range on the Super Linton compared to the...
The mid-range, we didn't need to change that. The mid-range unit is extremely good. It's really the key to the performance of the Linton and the Super Linton. But what we did do is we looked at the way that the mid-range unit worked into its rear enclosure and improved the damping in the rear enclosure so that it's a cleaner, more detailed sound to match with the performance that we get from the new treble unit and the new bass unit.
And the new treble unit, yeah, you get to that.
New treble unit, lighter fabric dome, so it goes up higher in frequency and reacts with better transient speed, like as the bass unit does. Still a coated fabric dome, but now much more responsive. And I would hesitate to say actually slightly smoother.
Slightly smoother as well.
Yeah, so smoother and more detailed. You know.
How do you marry those two?
What we need.
Right. One of the things people like about the Linton is like no matter what electronics, meaning an amplifier, you throw at it, it sounded good, right? Would you say that we get the same with the Super Linton, that kind of compatibility, that no matter if it's a transistor amplifier, if it's a valve amplifier, do you still get that? What was the question I was going to ask? Do they follow the same path as the Linton, as the original Linton? Like you compare them pretty much with anything, or at least on your experience. I mean, that's very subjective, I understand, but from your point of view,
well, I think we have to take various things into account here. The first is the cabinet is a completely different construction. So Linton 85 cabinet has a certain amount of resonance to its panels. It's very low in frequency, but again, it produces that warmth, which I remember from speakers back in the 50s and 60s, and which people love. The Super Linton has a double layer cabinet with a layer of latex glue between them, so that the resonance from the panels is lowered in level considerably. And that means that the bass is tighter and cleaner, but it also means that there's a little less natural warmth from the cabinet. So that means that overall the speaker is perhaps a bit more revealing than Linton. The other aspect is the crossover. And the crossover, we worked really hard at making something which was as electrically transparent as we could. So not only is it as a new design to suit the new drive units, but also the crossover is now split into two.
Yeah.
So we have a treble mid-range section on one PCB and a bass section on the other PCB. The reason for that is to reduce the interaction between the bass inductor, for example, and the mid-range treble components, particularly now that we have air core coils in the mid-range and treble, which are more susceptible to electromagnetic interference.
Okay.
Also, the capacitors are now what I would call audiophile grade polypropylene capacitors throughout, and we use these capacitors throughout. Again, gives us a slightly cleaner performance, low distortion performance. And then also the cables to the drive units. They have a polyethylene dielectric, which again reduces what I would call micro distortions in the sound. And a long crystal oxygen-free copper. So we've looked at all these things and introduced things where we thought they were necessary to give us that raise in performance. But of course, once you start doing that, you are then creating a speaker which is much more transparent to whatever you're putting in front of it.
Which is the idea, isn't it?
Yeah. So whereas with Linton 85, you could literally put anything with it. I've seen people pick old Pioneer receivers out of a bin somewhere and drive their Lintons with that. And I am actually quite horrified to a certain extent that people are doing that. But if they're getting what they enjoy, that's fine. But I'm not sure you could do that with Super Linton because I think it would expose these older electronics designs for what
Because
they are.
of it being more revealing.
Being more revealing.
Yeah,
however, on the other hand, I'm a great believer in making loudspeakers that don't make amplifiers work hard. Because once you do that, you start finding that your loudspeakers only work with a very, very small, limited number of amplifiers that can drive them. So I try really hard to make sure that I design loudspeakers that can be fairly easily driven by any amplifier. And Super Linton's actually very good in that respect.
And as the users, we thank you for that.
It's nearly, over the majority of its range, it's nearly a perfect 6-ohm load. So that means that when you put it, for example, on a valve tube amplifier, it's a very good match for, let's say, the 4-ohm, a typical 4-ohm tap on a valve tube amplifier will suit it very well, and you'll get the maximum efficiency from your amplifier. But because it's practically a nice even 6-ohm load without any huge phase angles or anything to upset an amplifier, yes, you can use whatever amplifier that you prefer with it. And it
Do you hear that, guys?
won't matter.
And now in hi-fi, we always like to talk about sound and how it sounds and how it sounds. But the looks, I mean, do you think, why do you think that vintage speakers are so, I mean, because I think it's quite of the appeal of the Lintons or the Super Lintons, that vintage appeal. And I think a lot of brands follow suit after Linton, and they're doing this this kind of cabinet.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big part of the success of Linton, would you say, apart from the amazing sound?
Yes, I think it's a love it or don't love it type of look. In Wharfedale, I'm very happy to produce speakers like Evo and Aura and Elysian, which are more modern looking and still achieve what I want a loudspeaker to do. So the choice is there for people to choose between a more modern design and something that harks back to the Robert Gutmann design of the 60s. But I think what Robert Gutmann got right was this furniture appeal. And what appealed to the original Linton buyers back in 1965 and what we've carried through today is a speaker which looks very nice in the home. And I think people respond to that look as much as they do to the sound of the speaker. And that has tremendous appeal. Yeah,
that's right what you say, that it's not that you have just, you go into your living room, you see just two pair of speakers just there with the drivers. No, it's a furniture. It blends in with the rest of the home. And yeah, I can see why that would be successful.
And also to design speakers with the grills fitted so that they work best with the grills fitted is something unusual in this day and age.
Good point.
A lot of people like to take the grills off and look at their drive units when they're listening. And, for example, as I said, the Evo and Aura and Elysian range, you can do that, and it obviously works. But I think this vintage look, people prefer to look at the speaker as a piece of furniture, and therefore you have a nice fabric front grille inset into the speaker cabinet. It looks really nice, it looks really neat, and that's the way it should be used.
And you made a point about it's better to listen to them with the grills on.
Yes.
That's something I've heard you say before in an interview. How come? How does it help, and in what sense? I mean,
well, if you take the grill off, then you're left with this, what I call acoustically, this is a nasty edge.
Right.
And it causes reflections off that edge, which you can hear. Subliminal, really. It's difficult to say what you're hearing, but you can hear something going on which shouldn't be there. So what the grill does is we have special shape within the grill, and it's also the edges of the grill are chamfered, they're angled in such a way that when you have the grill on, it enhances the output of the drive units rather than disturbing them. So the overall performance of the speaker is designed with the grill in place.
Okay, so keep your grills on at home if you got a Linton, a Super Linton. Would you say the same about the Denton, for example?
Same about
Super
the
Linton?
Denton,
Yeah,
exactly the same.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, and I've got one question. It's really interesting to me. Like, I suppose when an artist releases a book or has a movie on the cinema, you know, it must be a really good sensation to know I mean, if someone likes that product that you're showing to the world, how do you feel to know that a lot of people are enjoying your designs at home and it's their favorite speaker? You know, like, how does it feel for you? Because you are the creator in the end.
Well, it's great. I mean, I produce loudspeakers. I design loudspeakers to satisfy myself. You know, I take speakers home. I listen to them with my wife. We both discuss how they're performing, what we like, what we don't like, and if there's something we don't like, I'll then go and improve that until we're happy. So principally, I'm designing something which I can sit at home and listen to and thoroughly enjoy. But to know that other people do that as well is wonderful, because I just think that, you know, if you go back to medieval times, the only people that could afford music in the home were the lords and ladies of the manor and the castle who would employ minstrels to play for them. And now we can have a whole orchestra playing for us, or a whole jazz group playing for us, or a whole rock group playing for us, or folk, or whatever, in our homes, and it sounds real.
No need to be a king.
If you close your eyes, it sounds as though there are people in the room playing their instruments and singing to you. And I think that's an extraordinary thing to be able to do in this modern day and age. But to be able to do that and also get across the emotional content of the music is a difficult thing to do, especially for a speaker designer. So to hear from people that they absolutely love, and I mean, I get messages all the time on social media from people saying, just bought the Super Lintons, or just bought the Linton 85s, and I'm thoroughly enjoying my music again.
There are forums online, there are groups of Linton lovers.
That's fantastic.
Probably a sect or a cult or something, maybe, I don't know.
That's fantastic.
That's great. Well, Peter, I've got no more questions, and well, thank you very much for giving us your time to do this interview and talk about the Linton and Super Lintons. It's great to have you here. I'll definitely ask you more questions off camera, because I've got so many technical, I need to ask you some stuff. I need to pick your brains since I got you here. So, well, chicos, muchas gracias por escuchar este vídeo. Podéis ver, a Peter, que lo tenemos acá una vez más. Y él habla aquí en este video de las diferencias entre los Linton y el Super Linton. Muy contento de tenerlos aquí porque nos puede dar el detalle de cómo llegaron a esas conclusiones. Y bueno, hasta la próxima.
Wow, Luis, qué entrevista tan interesante de verdad que has hecho. Pero ahora yo tengo la duda a ti a nivel personal, porque al final ya las has escuchado las dos.
Sí.
¿Qué opinión tienes de ellas?
A ver, a nivel personal, también basado en el tipo de música que yo escucho, bastante amplio, pero escucho muchas más producciones modernas. Me viene bien ese extra de detalle que tienen los Super Linton, sobre todo en la parte alta, en la parte de los medios, y de hecho el grave, que es mucho más potente, tiene más pegada. Porque para grabaciones modernas las puedo apreciar mucho mejor, que están grabadas con cierta calidad, y esos detalles no molestan, porque está muy bien producido. Para mí, en comparación con las Linton, que son unas cajas que no son tan reveladoras, vienen muy bien con grabaciones tal vez más antiguas o con grabaciones en las que se beneficie, tal vez en la parte alta, en la parte media está más redondeado, pero para mí personalmente, si escuchas música moderna, pero te gusta esa tímbrica vintage de los Linton, las Super Linton son tus cajas.
Sí, bueno, al final yo creo también que son un poco dos altavoces, dos conceptos muy diferentes entre ellos. Como bien indicabas, las Linton son un poco más oscuras, más neutras. Eso también tiene su parte más positiva, porque al final lo vas a poder juntar con más con más electrónica, son más agradecidas también con la amplificación. De cierta manera, lo que tú decías un poco, cualquier cosa que tú le pongas, un vinilo antiguo, una grabación que no esté tan bien producida, te va a sonar bien. En cambio, eso con la Super Linton también hay que tenerlo en cuenta, porque al final si tú le pones algo que esté mal producido, te lo va a revelar, te vas a dar cuenta. Entonces yo creo que son dos altavoces totalmente diferentes para dos públicos muy distintos. Entonces aquí yo creo que lo importante es saber qué escuchas, cómo te gusta escucharlo y sobre todo también si vas a por la Super Linton, saber elegir bien qué le va a acompañar a este sistema.
Correcto, y bueno, y tomando un poco las palabras de Peter durante la entrevista, él dice que aunque estéticamente se parecen y en el nivel del lineal de productos se mantiene, las Super Linton son del lineal de Linton, valga la redundancia, se acercó a este proyecto como un altavoz totalmente distinto. O sea, es un proyecto totalmente distinto que él dice, a ver, sí, mantuvo el nombre, mantuvo la estética, pero en cuanto a sonido, estamos hablando de un producto totalmente separado. O sea,
Totalmente.
la manera en que han tratado pues, los medios, la parte de los agudos, la parte de los graves, es un altavoz distinto, totalmente.
Sí, sí, pero bueno, al final yo creo que para salir de dudas lo mejor es escucharlas.
100%.
O sea, esto al final se puede hacer tanto aquí como en la tienda de Bilbao. Y luego también tenemos una promoción muy buena porque sabemos que sois muchos los que ya tenéis Linton y si queréis probar la Super Linton y os convencen, tenemos una promoción que es para hacer un upgrade.
Un upgrade, tenemos la promoción Renove, abonamos 700 euros para la compra de unas nuevas Super Linton. Si nos traen las Linton clásicas anteriores.
Correcto.
A nosotros hay ciertas condiciones que bueno, podéis consultar directamente por correo o en nuestra página web y os daremos todos los detalles. Pero sí, muy interesante para el que quiera hacer ese upgrade.
Eso es. Pues yo creo que ya está todo listo y todo muy claro. Al final, ¿no?
A ver, Peter lo ha dejado muy claro allí. Me ha gustado mucho su manera de diseñar. Me hacía énfasis en lo que es... Hay que mucha gente obsesionada con las medidas, cómo mide un altavoz, cómo mide esto. Y él decía, a ver, las medidas yo lo uso simplemente al inicio, a la hora de diseñar, ya el resto es mi propio criterio. Y bueno, me parece interesante porque hay muchas maneras de hacer los altavoces, hay muchas maneras de diseñarlos y al final pues Peter nos está dando su apreciación de lo que es un altavoz agradable y que está hecho para todo público.
Totalmente. Pues nada, dejad en los comentarios qué os ha parecido esta entrevista, si tenéis unas Linton, si tenéis curiosidad por escuchar la Super Linton, lo que sea. Cualquier cosa que nos digáis ya es bien recibida y poco más que decir, ¿no?
Sí, ya sois bienvenidos en la tienda cuando queráis venir a escuchar. Y pues hasta el próximo vídeo.
Chao.
Oh!